There are bonds that are formed quietly, without fanfare. But they leave a mark so deep that nothing, not even time, can erase them. Ty had that kind of bond with one horse. A horse that he saved, nurtured, and helped heal. But when Ty left, this horse Storm refused to trust anyone else. In fact, he wouldn't be trained by anyone else. Now, back at Heartland, after some time away, Ty faces a tough choice. Does he return to Storm, the horse he once called his own, even if it means risking everything? Can a bond so powerful survive the test of time? Or is it better to let go? The Heartland Ranch had never looked quite the same since Ty left. The barn still stood strong, the fields stretched far and wide, and the horses were as wild and beautiful as ever. But there was something different. A quietness. A longing that seemed to fill the air. As Ty pulled up to the ranch, he could already feel the weight of everything he left behind. Ty had always known this day would come, the day when he would return after taking time for himself and his family. The ranch, the animals, and the land had been his life for so long that stepping away was never easy. But things had changed. The bond with his wife, Amy, and their daughter, Lindy, had become the center of his world. Yet, no matter how far he went, one piece of Heartland was always on his mind. The one horse that never let go. Storm had been a special case. When Ty first met him, Storm was a wild one, reluctant to trust anyone. He had been through so much, and the scars, both physical and emotional, were still fresh. But Ty had always believed in second chances. That's what Heartland was about, giving animals the care and attention they deserved, even when they didn't trust you. Storm had been a challenge, but Ty was determined. He spent days and nights with the horse, slowly breaking down the walls, earning his trust, one small step at a time. And before long, Storm was no longer the angry, mistrusting stallion that had been brought in. He had become a partner someone Ty could count on, in and out of the arena. That was until the day Ty left. When he told the family that he would be stepping back to focus on his family, Storm reacted in a way Ty never expected. The horse, once full of life and spirit, grew distant, shut down even. Ty's absence created a void that no one, not even Amy, could fill. As Ty walked past the barn toward the stable, caught sight of Storm standing alone by the fence. His glossy coat shimmered in the afternoon sunlight, but his eyes were cold, distant. There was no excitement in his gaze, no welcoming whinny like there used to be when Ty walked through the gates. It was almost like Storm was waiting for him to come back, but not trusting that he would. The feeling hit Ty harder than he expected. It wasn't just a horse. It was Storm, the one horse he had worked with, who had refused to let anyone else in. Storm was no longer a wild stallion trying to make it on his own. He was a creature who had learned to trust, learned to rely on someone he felt was family. And that family had left him. Ty couldn't shake the guilt that came with that. He took a deep breath and approached the horse slowly, his hands outstretched, trying not to make any sudden movements. Storm's head turned slightly, and for a moment it felt like the bond they once shared was still there, lingering. But when Ty took another step closer, Storm pulled back, the tension in his muscles visible. Ty stopped. He knew the horse's behavior wasn't Storm being difficult. It was fear. The fear of abandonment. The fear of trusting again. And at that moment, Ty understood. No matter how many horses he worked with, no matter how much training he did, Storm was special. He was the last horse Ty worked with before stepping away, and their connection was something that couldn't be replaced. But the question remained, could he ever repair the trust that had been broken, or was it too late? And if Storm refused to trust anyone else, what did that mean for the future of Heartland, for the ranch, and for everything Ty had worked so hard to build? Ty stood there, his hands still outstretched, waiting for any sign from Storm. The sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows over the Heartland Ranch as Ty stood still, staring at Storm. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. But Storm wasn't moving. He stood there, just watching Ty with those deep, guarded eyes. It was as if he was trying to decide whether he should trust this man again, or if it was safer to keep his distance. Ty knew that feeling all too well. He'd been here before, standing in the same position, wondering if it was even possible to rebuild a trust that had been broken. There had been other horses, other challenges, but with Storm, it had always been different. They had shared something more than just training sessions and competitions. Their connection had been built on mutual understanding, a bond forged through time and patience. It was the kind of trust that went beyond just commands and Reinhold. Deeper than the bond between rider and horse, it was almost spiritual. But now, it felt like that bond was gone. Like it had slipped through his fingers. Amy, watching from a distance, could feel the tension too. She had seen Ty work with countless horses, but nothing like this. She knew the power of trust between a horse and a rider, but this was different. She had never seen Storm react like this before. Even when Ty left, Storm had always been a tough case. But he had never turned away from anyone this completely. Amy slowly approached Ty, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's not the same, is he?" Ty didn't answer right away. He just shook his head, his eyes never leaving Storm. "I thought I was doing the right thing, Amy. I thought walking away would be the best thing for all of us. For me, for you, for our family. But I never thought it would hurt him this way." Amy stood beside him, her gaze soft but filled with concern. "He's not angry, Ty. He's just ... scared. You left, and to him, that probably felt like you gave up on him." Ty closed his eyes, fighting the wave of guilt that crashed over him. "I didn't leave him on purpose. I thought he'd be fine without me. He had you. He had the ranch. I thought he'd be okay." He looked down at the ground, his voice shaky. "But I was wrong." They both turned back to look at Storm, who was still standing where he had been, unmoving. His eyes followed them cautiously, but there was no spark, no recognition like there had been before. It was as though the once bright connection between them had dimmed into something unrecognizable. There was a silence, thick with uncertainty, as Ty fought to come to terms with what had happened. He had always been someone who could fix things: animals, problems, people, but this felt different. This wasn't a simple fix. This wasn't just about getting Storm to listen to commands or go through the motions of training. This was about healing something that had been broken deep within. As Ty slowly turned back to Amy, he could feel the weight of everything hanging in the air, the expectations of the ranch, the future of the horses, and his family. But there was something else, something that neither of them had said out loud. The looming truth. If Storm refused to trust anyone but him, if Ty didn't find a way to rebuild that trust, what did that mean for his future at Heartland? The ranch needed Storm. The clients were counting on him. The next big competition was coming up, and Storm was meant to be a star. But the horse wouldn't perform with anyone else. The ranch was on the line, and they didn't have time to wait for Storm to heal at his own pace. It was a cruel twist of fate. Ty was needed, but so much had changed. And yet, there was something inside Ty that told him Storm wasn't just a horse to be used for profit. He wasn't a tool. He wasn't a resource. Storm was a living, breathing creature who had given everything he had to Ty. And now, Storm was asking for the same thing in return. It wasn't just about riding again. It was about Storm needing Ty to come back, not as a rider, but as someone who could heal the bond that had been severed. "Do you think he can ever forgive me?" Ty finally asked, his voice quiet but full of desperation. He wasn't just asking about Storm. He was asking about everything: his choices, his absence, the fractured pieces of his life that he had left behind. Amy looked at him, the wind gently tugging at her hair. "I think he already has," she said, her voice steady. "But it's not about forgiving you, Ty. It's about whether you're ready to forgive yourself and come back for him, for you." Ty didn't say anything for a long time. He didn't need to. He knew Amy was right. But the question still lingered in the back of his mind. Could Storm ever truly trust again? Could their bond be repaired? Or was it already too late? The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling. Ty could sense the weight in the air as the family, as well as the whole ranch, moved around Storm. There was a quiet sadness that hung over the ranch like a cloud, and it wasn't just about the horse. It was about the trust, something deeper than any of them could easily fix. It was early in the morning when Ty decided he needed to confront Storm again. The ranch was still quiet. The barn doors opened just enough to let the morning light spill in, illuminating the dusty air. The horses were grazing in the far field, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something. Anything. Ty could feel the weight of that something pressing down on his shoulders. This time, he approached cautiously, not wanting to rush things. The bond between him and Storm had always been about patience, so he knew the importance of taking things slow. But today, the tension was undeniable. Storm wasn't grazing like the others. He stood by the fence, his head hanging low, staring at the ground as if he was trying to avoid everyone around him. Ty stopped a few feet away and exhaled. The quiet air pushing the dust into small swirls. He watched Storm carefully, as if the horse might suddenly bolt, or worse, turn away completely. The memories of their time together, working side by side, riding through the trails, competing in shows flooded back. But now, there was only silence. Amy watched from the doorway of the barn. She had been helping with the other horses, but she couldn't stop herself from glancing at the two of them. Ty's approach was calm. Steady. He'd learned over the years that sometimes animals needed time more than anything else. But Amy could see the toll it was taking on him. He had always been the one to fix things. And now it felt like everything he touched was slipping away. Maybe he needs more time, Amy said softly. Stepping beside him, Ty didn't respond at first, his eyes still on Storm. He doesn't need time, Amy. He needs me. But I don't know if I can fix this. Amy didn't say anything, but the concern in her eyes was clear. She could see Ty struggling, and it hurt her too. She wanted to tell him that it wasn't his fault, that Storm was just as confused as he was, but she knew there was no easy fix. The horse wasn't mad at him, but he was lost in a way that only someone who had been abandoned could understand. Ty took a deep breath, stepping closer. He reached out, his hand just shy of Storm's neck. The horse's ears flicked in his direction, but he didn't move. Ty waited and waited. For a brief moment, he thought about giving up. Maybe it was time to walk away, to leave Storm to figure things out on his own. But the thought didn't sit right. Not with everything they had been through. He remembered the first time he had laid hands on Storm, the struggle to get the horse to trust him. He remembered the gentle nudge, the quiet moments of connection that had made it all worth it. Those were the moments that had made Storm more than just a horse. He was a partner, a reflection of TY's own ability to trust again. And now, that connection was gone. He couldn't walk away. Not now. Slowly, Ty took another step forward, and this time, Storm didn't pull back. There was no sudden movement, no desperate attempt to flee, but there was something different in the air. Storm stood still, his head lifting slightly as if testing the waters. For the first time in days, Ty felt a flicker of hope. "You remember me, don't you?" Ty said, his voice soft but steady. "You and me, we've been through a lot. And I know I let you down, but I'm here now." His hand slowly, carefully reached for the horse's neck. For a second, Storm tensed, but only for a moment. TY's touch was gentle, slow, letting Storm feel the comfort he had once known. Storm's eyes softened, and his body seemed to relax. But he didn't fully give in. Ty could feel the hesitation. It was as if the horse was testing him, still unsure whether he was worthy of Storm's trust. There was a delicate balance now, a dance that would require more than just physical closeness. It would require patience, vulnerability, and an understanding that Ty couldn't force his way back into. Storm's heart, the weight of the ranch's expectations of the competition of the future, pressed down on Ty. But the more he stood there with Storm, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about the competition or saving face. This wasn't even about fixing the ranch's financial troubles. This was about something deeper, the need to repair the bond that had been shattered between them. And it wasn't something that could be rushed. "You don't have to forgive me right now," Ty whispered, his voice catching. "I just need you to know, I'm not going anywhere again." For the first time in days, Storm moved his head slightly, nudging Ty's hand. It was small, but it was something. Ty felt the familiar warmth flood through him, the relief of knowing that maybe, just maybe, they could fix this. It wouldn't be easy, but it had to start somewhere. Ty stayed there for a long time, his hand resting gently on Storm's neck, his heart sinking with the steady rhythm of the horse's breathing. There was still a long road ahead, but in that quiet moment, something shifted. And Ty knew that, no matter what, he wasn't walking away this time. The sun had fully risen by the time Ty finally stepped away from Storm. The warmth of the day felt different now. Lighter somehow, as though the weight of the past few days had shifted, even if just a little. Storm hadn't fully surrendered his trust, but there was a tiny spark in his eyes, a glimmer that hadn't been there before. And for the first time since returning to Heartland, Ty felt a small breath of relief. But as he walked back to the barn, that relief quickly faded into a familiar pressure. Amy was already in the barn, tending to the other horses, her hands working quickly, but her eyes never straying far from Ty. She didn't need to say anything for him to know that there was a bigger concern waiting for him. The ranch wasn't just in financial trouble anymore, it was hanging by a thread. The competition was coming up fast, and if Storm didn't perform, the entire operation could fall apart. Clients were counting on the success of the upcoming season, and if the ranch didn't make a strong showing, they might lose everything. Ty felt that pressure like a physical weight pressing against his chest. He had always been able to handle the ranch's demands, the horses' needs, the family's expectations. But now, with Storm refusing to trust anyone but him, it felt like everything was collapsing in slow motion. Amy, Ty started, his voice low as he walked into the barn. "We need to talk." She set down the brush she was holding, her expression serious. "I know. This is bigger than just Storm, it's bigger than us." He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "We've got a real problem on our hands. Storm... He's not going to trust anyone else. I can feel it." Amy didn't say anything for a moment, her eyes searching his face. "I saw that. He hasn't let anyone near him. It's like he's waiting for you to come back." Ty glanced at the stable door, where Storm was standing, his head low, and his eyes watching the barn with caution. "I can't fix this on my own. Not without risking everything we've built here." Amy's gaze softened.
"What are you saying?"
He took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of thoughts swirling inside his head. "I think I have to ride again. I think I have to go back to Storm for the competition. But not just for the competition. I need to show him I'm not abandoning him. I need him to believe in me again." There was a long pause before Amy spoke again. "Ty, you're talking about risking everything? What if Storm doesn't come around? What if you can't get him to trust you in time?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the reality of the situation. Ty knew the stakes. If he couldn't regain Storm's trust, the competition would be lost. If the competition was lost, Heartland would suffer. It would be the blow they couldn't recover from, but there was something in Ty that wouldn't allow him to back down. Storm wasn't just a horse, he was more than that. Ty had always prided himself on fixing the broken pieces, whether it was people, animals, or even the ranch itself. Walking away from Storm wasn't an option. If there was any hope of saving the ranch, it had to come through that horse. "I don't know if I can fix this, Amy," Ty confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't just walk away either. I owe it to him, to us, to Heartland." Amy reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know you do. But don't forget, you don't have to do it alone. We're all in this together." Her words, simple but strong, grounded Ty in that moment. He wasn't alone in this. Even though Storm had pulled away, even though the future of the ranch rested on his shoulders, he still had his family, and that had to count for something. He looked back toward Storm, who was still standing by the fence, waiting. The horse had waited for him to come back, even when it felt like there was no hope left. Ty couldn't waste that chance. He owed Storm more than that. He owed him everything. "I'll do whatever it takes," Ty said, his voice resolute. "But if we don't make this work, if Storm won't trust me again, then we might not have a future at Heartland." As the weight of the words hit him, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about getting Storm ready for the competition anymore. It wasn't just about saving the ranch. It was about the bond, the unspoken promise he had made when he first took Storm in. The promise to never give up, no matter how hard it got. Ty turned back toward the stable door. This time his steps were firm, purposeful. He wasn't just walking back to Storm, he was walking toward the hardest challenge of his life. And there was no turning back. The days blurred together as T poured everything he had into rebuilding his bond with Storm. Every morning, he arrived at the barn before sunrise, determined to start fresh, as if he could undo the months he'd spent away. He had to show Storm that he was back for good, that this time, nothing would pull him away, not the pressures of the ranch, not the competition, not even his own doubts. But each day felt like a slow progression. Storm wasn't making it easy. There were moments when he would stand still, allowing Ty to come close. But the horse was always on edge, his body tense, his eyes wary. Other times, Storm would refuse to even look in Ty's direction, turning his back to him as though saying, "You left me once, why shouldn't I leave you?" Amy, ever the patient one, watched from a distance. She helped with the other horses and kept the ranch running, but her eyes never strayed too far from the two of them. She knew how hard Ty was working, but she also knew that Storm wasn't just a challenge for Tyette, it was a challenge for both of them. The trust between them had been broken, and while the horse might be able to forgive, it wasn't something that could be rushed. One evening, after another failed attempt to get Storm to warm up, Ty found himself sitting on a fence post, exhausted. He rubbed his face, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. The competition was getting closer, and Storm was no closer to trusting anyone, let alone being ready for a public showing. Ty had always been able to handle pressure before, but now it felt like he was facing the impossible. What am I doing wrong? Ty whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. Why can't he just trust me again? The sound of hooves approaching broke his thoughts. Amy, holding a bucket of feed, walked up beside him and stopped. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, letting him sit in his frustration. Sometimes Amy finally said softly, "It's not about what you're doing wrong. Sometimes it's about what you're doing right." Ty looked at her, his eyes tired. "What do you mean?" Amy leaned against the fence, the silence between them heavy with understanding. "Storm. He's been hurt. You know that. And he might not understand why you left, but that doesn't mean he's forgotten who you are. You can't force him to trust you again, Ty. It's not about fixing him, it's about showing him that you're here for the long haul. And sometimes, that means giving him the space to make his own decision." Ty rubbed his hands over his face again, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been so focused on the competition, on the ranch's future, that he hadn't realized he was approaching the problem from the wrong angle. He wasn't trying to heal Storm, he was trying to control the situation. And that, perhaps, was his biggest mistake. Amy continued, her voice calm but full of wisdom. "You can't rush trust. You can't rush healing. Storm is a living being, not a machine. And right now, you need to show him, not through words or commands, but through actions, that you're here for him. Not for the competition, not for the ranch, but for him. And that might mean taking a step back, even if it feels like you're losing time." The simplicity of it hit Ty like a wave. He had been trying so hard to fix everything, to make things right in the eyes of the ranch, the clients, and even himself, that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. Storm wasn't a tool to win a competition. He was a partner, a living, breathing creature who had been hurt just like Ty had been in his own way. "What if it's too late?" Ty asked, the doubt creeping into his voice. "It's never too late," Amy replied, with a soft smile. "Not for you, not for Storm, but it's not on your timeline. It's on his." The words resonated deep within Ty. It wasn't about rushing to get Storm ready. It was about being there when. Storm was ready. The pressure of the competition, the financial strain of the ranch, it all seemed to fade away, replaced by the quiet certainty that what he needed most was patience. The next morning, Ty went to the stable earlier than usual. But instead of trying to force Storm into training, he simply sat in the stall next to him, letting the horse approach on his own terms. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't demanding. He was simply there, present in a way that he hadn't been before. The hours passed, the sun climbing higher in the sky, and as the day wore on, something began to shift. Slowly, cautiously, Storm approached him. He didn't nudge him at first, but his steps grew less hesitant. And then, Storm took a small step closer, his nose nearly brushing Ty's hand. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a moment of complete trust, but it was progress. Ty's heart soared with the smallest victory. It wasn't about the competition anymore. It was about Storm knowing, deep down, that Ty was here for him. And that was enough. As he stayed there, with Storm standing just a few inches away, Ty knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something new. It wouldn't happen overnight, but with time, patience, and the willingness to put his heart into it, Ty had started to rebuild the one thing that mattered more than any competition, the trust between him and Storm. The next few days felt different. The morning air seemed lighter, and for the first time since Ty had returned to Heartland, there was a sense of calm that stretched through the barn. Ty spent hours with Storm, not rushing him, not demanding anything in return. Every moment felt like a step forward, even if it was just the smallest shift. Storm was starting to relax around him again, slowly, but it was happening. The horse would graze near him now, not turning away. Sometimes, he would let Ty come close, standing side by side without hesitation. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. But there was still a gnawing feeling in the pit of Ty's stomach. Time was slipping away. The competition, the pressure on the ranch, it was all closing in on them. He couldn't deny that Storm wasn't ready yet. Not for a big show, not for a performance that would be watched by clients, spectators, and everyone who depended on the success of Heartland. Still, there was something different in the way Storm moved now. Ty could feel the shift. It wasn't just that the horse was no longer pulling a weight, it was that Storm had started to trust him in ways he hadn't in weeks. It was like a door opening ever so slightly, and for the first time, Ty felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still time. Amy had been watching the two of them from the sidelines. She had seen Ty's struggle, his frustration, but also his determination. She could see the shift too, and although she could tell that Ty was still unsure, still feeling the weight of responsibility, she also knew that something had changed in him. One morning, as Ty brushed down Storm, Amy walked up behind him, holding a cup of coffee in her hand. She stood in silence for a moment, watching the way Storm responded to Ty's touch of calmness, a soft nudge against his shoulder. For the first time in a long while, Amy saw the same connection between them that had existed before. It was quiet, not dramatic, but it was there. "You're getting through to him," Amy said, her voice gentle but full of admiration. "He's not the same horse he was when you came back." Ty paused, looking over at her, his hand resting on Storm's neck. "I don't know if we're ready, Amy. We've barely made any progress." Amy shook her head, smiling slightly. "You've made more progress than you realize. The hardest part was never getting Storm to perform again. It was earning his trust. And you're doing that?" Ty sighed, his eyes tracing Storm's movements as the horse lifted his head, his ears flicking toward him. Storm was calm, standing still, no longer pulling away. There was something about his presence that made everything else feel quieter, more manageable. "It feels like we're running out of time," Ty admitted, his voice tinged with worry. "The competition is coming up soon, and the ranch needs us. But I don't think Storm's ready to be out there again." Amy stepped closer, leaning against the fence. "Maybe that's the point, Ty. You don't need him to be ready for the competition yet. You just need him to be ready for you to trust him again. And when you do, when you can see him for who he is now, not who he used to be, that's when he'll be ready." Ty looked at her, her words sinking deep within him. The pressure of the ranch, the competition, the future everything had built up in his mind as the thing that mattered most. But Amy was right. Storm wasn't just a competitor, a tool for saving the ranch. He was a partner, a creature that had been through more than just a training session, more than just the typical challenges of a horse and rider. Storm had been through a loss, just like Ty had. And this wasn't just about the competition. It was about understanding the journey of healing, of taking the time to truly rebuild something from the ground up. Ty took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity that he hadn't had in days. "You're right. I've been trying to rush everything. Trying to fix it, fix him. But I need to stop focusing on the competition and just focus on Storm. On us." Akemi smiled, her eyes bright with understanding. "Exactly. And when the time comes, you'll know. Trust that." Tai nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his decision start to lift. He hadn't fully realized it until now, but this wasn't about the end result. It wasn't about winning. It was about showing up, being present for the horse who had waited for him, and allowing that trust to grow again. The competition day arrived faster than Tai had anticipated. The weight of it settled on his shoulders, a constant reminder of what was at stake, not just for the ranch, but for him and Storm. But as the sun rose over Heartland that morning, there was a calmness in Tai that hadn't been there before. The rush of deadlines, the pressure of the competition, it had all faded into the background. All that mattered now was Storm and the bond they were still building. Tai walked into the barn, his heart steady, but his hands still carrying the faint tremor of nervousness. Storm stood by the stall, his head low, eyes calm. There was a stillness in the air that mirrored what Tai had come to understand in himself over the last few days. Storm wasn't the same horse he had been when Tai left, and Tai wasn't the same person either. They had both changed, both healed in their own ways. "Today isn't about perfection," Tai whispered to the horse, his voice soft. "It's about us. It's about trusting each other, even if it's just a little bit more." He stepped into the stall and gently placed his hand on Storm's neck. The horse's muscles didn't tense. Instead, Storm leaned into the touch, his head tilting ever so slightly as though acknowledging that the man beside him had earned something more than just his presence. Amy came into the barn, her eyes scanning the room, her expression unreadable. Tai could see the concern in her gaze, but also a quiet confidence. She had seen him work with Storm before. She knew this was their moment, not just for the competition, but for themselves. "You ready for this?" she asked, her voice low but full of hope. Tai looked at her, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm ready. We're ready." It wasn't about winning anymore. It wasn't about proving to anyone else that they had what it took. It was about showing up for Storm, for himself, for the family, and for the ranch. It was about trusting in the journey and the time it took to heal and grow. The true victory, Tai realized, was the trust that had been rebuilt, step by step, over the past few weeks. That was something no competition could take away. As they prepared to leave for the arena, Tai stood at Storm's side. The other horses in their stalls, the ranch buzzing with quiet energy. Amy helped him get ready, making sure everything was in place. But it was clear that there was something different about today. There was no rush, no panic. Just calm. The calm that comes from knowing that you've done all you can, and that now you just have to let the journey unfold. When they reached the arena, the energy shifted. The crowds were filling the stands, the murmurs of the audience rising like a distant tide. Tai felt the old pressure return, but it didn't weigh him down. It was just there, a reminder of the stakes. But Storm? Storm stood tall, calm, his head held high. He wasn't the horse who had been broken by abandonment. He wasn't the horse who had pushed everyone away. He was a partner, ready to face whatever came next. The announcer called their names, and Tai swung himself into the saddle, the familiar weight of the reins in his hands. Storm shifted under him, and for the briefest moment, Tai could feel the horse's hesitation. It was fleeting, but it was there. And that was when Tai knew. He wasn't just riding for the competition. He was riding for the bond they had rebuilt. He was riding for trust, for healing, for the journey that had led them here. They moved forward together. The crowd's cheer fading into the background as Tai focused on Storm. The ride was far from flawless, but it didn't need to be. There were moments of perfect rhythm, moments when Storm moved like he used to, fluid and strong, and there were moments when they faltered, when Storm hesitated, unsure. But that was okay, because every step, every small victory was theirs. They were in this together. As they completed their final lap, Tai felt something in his chest tightened, a warmth spreading through him. They hadn't won the competition, but they had won something far greater: the trust between them. The quiet acknowledgement that they had come full circle, from broken trust to something new, something real. As they dismounted, Ty patted Storm on the neck, his fingers brushing through the horse's mane. The crowd's applause echoed, but Ty's heart was somewhere else, still out there on the field. "With Storm, you did it?" Amy said, standing by the fence, her eyes bright with pride. "You both did." Ty nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, we did." And as the day closed, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ty realized that winning didn't always mean standing on top. Sometimes it meant showing up, trusting the process, knowing that the heart of the journey was the trust they had built piece by piece. The future of Heartland, of Storm, of the ranch, none of that had been guaranteed when he'd first come back. But standing there, with Storm by his side, Ty knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. And whatever came next, they would face it together.